Now, Gerard, I'm a bit of long time, first time with our next guest. I love the segment. And
This is the first time?
I'm so thrilled to be reunited with this man because his segment here has been short. I just had a quick look. Shortlisted from everything from the Pulitzer to the Nobel Prize to the Booker. I can really pump it up. The superlatives have long since expired. For full-on footy analysis with Champion Data's Daniel Hoyne. Hoyne!
Sammy, great to have you on board. I'm absolutely pumped here. This is just full of energy.
I'm up and about. And the great thing is you're up and about for the first time for season 2025. We had our opening round reduced significantly, but I know you took a lot out of those 2 games.
Yeah, no, there's plenty to discuss off the back of only 2 games tonight, which we'll get into, and then plenty to look forward to ahead of round 1 and ahead of 2025.
Sammy, I must admit I've got to start with some devastating news for the smartest man in footy. All day I've been getting texts, I've been getting phone calls. Desperate he is to stay on after 7 to go on lawnography.
Lawnography?
and I'm going to have to just sack. I'm afraid you can't go on, Hoyne.
Oh,
you just got to stick to your knitting. Give us the numbers that count. And let Jimmy Thwaites be the expert on lawn. Everyone thinks they're an expert on lawns.
I might need
including the great man.
I might need Jimmy's counselling later on, so I'm glad I'm on with Jimmy, but that's a whole other story. Hey, Hoyne, you're here for Cobram Estate, of course, Australia's most awarded extra virgin olive oil. Snap judgments, to borrow a phrase from another presenter on this network. What did you make of the pair of games?
Yeah, so we'll start with the overall observation from the weekend, and only 2 games to discuss, but forever and a day when I've gone to the footy, and I'm sure you've been the same, G, and you've been the same, Sammy, that you constantly hear people just talk, just get it in there, just get it in there.
This is my mum. Just kick it.
Yeah, just kick it and just get it in there. And I think since, Clarko came up with the Clarko cluster in 2008, it has been a heavy forward half territory dominant game that has been played largely the same for 15 years. Get the footy in there, lock it in there, create forward half stoppage, create forward half turnover, and eventually you'll somehow find a way to score. But I feel like over the last, 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, let's say, the game is starting to change a little bit, and I think, we need to recognise it and sense it. I don't think that we've actually, been able to talk this way, as I said, for the best part of 15 years. And so over the last 6 years, the Premier has been top 3 at being able to score off the back of their ball movement. Right? Only one Premier hasn't been top 3, and that was Melbourne. Melbourne's game was built all around contest and defence. We've heard them speak about that for 3 or 4 years.
Heard that a few times.
But 5 of the other 6 Premiers have been top 3 off the back of scoring from ball movement. And we have slowly seen over the last couple of years, ball movement is becoming easier. Scoring is becoming easier off ball movement. You see what Collingwood did against GWS in particular in that 3rd quarter, and it's just get it in there, get it in there, get it in there. And not once did they really look a threat. You look at GWS games over the last couple of years, and the ball moves up and back, up and back. They're happy to concede 50-plus entries, but they'll get 50-plus entries themselves. No one wants the game camped in your back half. But the ability to be able to generate scores off the back of ball movement, which is becoming easier, is going to be so important in 2025. And if you can't do that, if you can't generate scores off the back of your ball movement, either starting in your defensive 50 or across that halfback area, history shows over the last 6 years, you're going to have to buck history to win it. And as you know, G and Sammy, I'll back history until history changes.
So that brings us to the question, on simplistic terms, do the inside 50 count, does that no longer matter?
I don't think, as I said, no one wants the game parked in your back half.
Yep.
But if you're breaking even or thereabouts in the territory battle, that's enough. Go to grand final day with Brisbane. Inside 50s are almost 50 apiece. But what comes off the back of it? Unbelievable ball movement by Brisbane to score off the back of it. Terrible ball movement off the back of Sydney to not score off the back of it. Think of Collingwood in 2023. The reason why Collingwood won the flag in 2023 was off that ballistic ball movement across that halfback area. It was shut down in 2024, and it was shut down on the weekend against GWS. And without that, they didn't have the offensive power to be able to generate anything meaningful.
So obviously, if you're bringing the ball out of your congested back line, you're going into your open forward line. The issue is, can you get it out with meaning? Are you better off, Hoyne, having your best kicks and decision makers across the half back line, and clearly midfielders are running down there also and trying to get the ball out, and even half forwards. But if you had to camp your best kick, would you have him in the middle kicking the ball inside forward 50, or would you have him trying to execute it out of congestion in your back line?
I would still have him in your forward half of the ground. I mean, you see what someone like a Hayden Young was able to do with Fremantle last year when he made the move into that centre forward type player. But I think it's more your collective ball movement method as a team when you're coming out of your back half. To have a method that is aggressive enough that's actually going to challenge opposition defensive units. So you look at how Brisbane do it, and Brisbane do it by just constant movement of the footy. It's changing angles, it's moving it quickly, it's getting it on, quickly by foot and changing angles that way. Then you look at how GWS did it on the weekend. It's a lot of handball, it's a lot of it's a lot of run and gun from your half back area. There's different ways to do it. I think that's sort of more doing it as a collective, but having that talent in the forward half of the ground to then be able to capitalise off the back of that ball movement, it is critical.
I look at the Swans and the way they move the ball, and you told us they're the second slowest moving ball team in the competition, and it's worked for them with the exception of the grand final. Do you think they need to add handball to those chains of short kicks?
I don't know if they do. I mean, again, going back to Brisbane don't do that. They did towards the end of last year actually, where they introduced a forward handball game that we hadn't seen from Brisbane for a couple of years. But potentially, I think Sydney are a hard one, because take the grand final aside, their ability to be able to score out of the back half last year and off-ball movement was actually one of their assets, and that was one of their points of difference. And yes, they were the third slowest ball movement team in the competition, but there's no sort of right or wrong way to do it, so long as it's actually generating you a scoreboard return. So I wouldn't be too sort of looking to change too much if I'm the Swans. I'm more looking at a couple of other teams and whether or not they're actually going to change their profile this year to be able to keep up with what the best teams in the competition are doing. Geelong last year, one of the highest scoring teams at the back half. Hawthorn do it. GWS do it. If you can't do it, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to be able to challenge for a flag this year. Just look at GWS on the weekend. 10 goals out of their back half and only 3 goals out of their forward half. That was and I think we could all see it on TV, but that was them, and that was the reason why Collingwood just simply couldn't keep up in the last 40 minutes of the game.
And to illustrate your point, wasn't the third quarter, did they have 20 entries, Collingwood, and were goalless?
20 entries, and that's why I'm sort of sitting there watching and going, when does it become enough or too much? I know, Darcy Cameron took an intercept mark across that half forward area in the third quarter. And I think Collingwood might have had 10 to 12 entries in a row. You sit there watching it going, it's almost worth going backwards here and actually trying to suck a few of these guys out.
Stuck in a cycle, wasn't it?
As opposed to just trying to get it back in there. And because it just didn't look like a threat. So just something for everyone just to just keep an eye on moving forward this year.
So if you hear, get it in there.
I don't want to hear get it in there.
Just kick it. Just kick it. It's my personal favourite. Just kick it.
I love that.
Just Hawthorn's front half game. Like Sydney, for a long period, struggled to get it out of there. I don't know what the numbers were. Dean Cox referenced them. I think it was 23 forward half intercepts or something, which is a pretty high number. So Sydney's ball movement that G's mentioning there, and we can get in the nitty gritty of obviously Tom McCartan playing forward, it does for the Lizard and the rest of it. But clearly their transition out of the back half was an issue for them.
Once they got through that halfway area, then they actually looked quite dangerous. But it was challenging for them to actually get it past halfway. And Hawthorn's inaccuracy at times off the back of those forward half intercepts could have actually made an even greater return. So that was a battle for them at times. It wasn't a battle for the Swans last year, but it was a battle for them on Friday night.
This is full-on footy analysis with Champion Data's Daniel Hoyne. We're blessed with his presence on a Tuesday evening. You've got the Giants' defence written down here in your talking point list.
Yeah, so early on in a season, I think we're just sitting back and assessing whether or not teams have gone to work and improved on some areas of concern from the previous year. And albeit the Giants fell, 3, 4, 5 points short of a prelim final and probably should have got there. But overall, their profile towards the end of last season, take Jesse Hogan out of it and take their freakish accuracy out of it, they did have some concerns. They won't anywhere near as strong as what they were in the back half of 2023 when they fell a point short to Collingwood in the prelim. And one of the areas of concern last year with GWS was their defensive unit and their ability to be able to hold up, especially off the back of when they actually turn the footy over, which is 60 to 65% of overall scoring. If you can't defend that aspect of the game, you're not going to be able to compete. And early sample against Collingwood so far, and Sam Taylor makes a huge difference with his performance on the weekend. But to turn the footy over 56 times against Collingwood and to only give up 25 points off the back of that, that's something that we did not see from GWS hardly at all in 2024. Their ability to be able to, when they turn the footy over in their forward half of the ground, GWS, to quickly turn into defence and absolutely shut down Collingwood's ballistic ball movement off the halfback area. 2023, as I said, with Collingwood, there was no better team at being able to score off that halfback area. GWS flatly denied that on the weekend. Turned the footy over 35 times in their forward half of the ground. GWS gave up 1 goal. So their ability to be able to, sort of join in on this team defensive unit, huge tick. And that was something that we actually didn't see last year. The other aspect of their defensive system on the weekend, which is really hard to sort of appreciate live, it's almost like you have to go back and watch it on replay, is what they did to Collingwood at stoppage. So Collingwood were able to get their hands on the footy 22 times more than GWS at stoppage, which is a ridiculous number. But then for GWS to simply swarm Collingwood at stoppage and force them to fumble, bobble, lose the ball, then GWS to be able to win it and explode out of there was something that we've very rarely seen before. So to actually lose the first possession count by 22 and still outscore Collingwood by 4 goals out of stoppage, huge defensive effort across the ground, huge defensive effort at stoppage for GWS to start the year.
They have almost an obsession with small forwards up at the Giants. There's 2 or 3 really high draft picks we still haven't seen. But you can see why when you look at the kid with the lid. I mean, his capacity to just add pressure, break through those congested areas and go from forward line to back line to fill in holes is, I guess, the blueprint of why they do it.
Yeah, and I felt like that we talked about this early on last year, that sort of if you go back and run the exercise now for best part of 10 plus years, if you have not got a group of these guys that are able to get up and back, again, the challenge for you to be absolutely, sort of buck the trend and, be able to defend the opposition's ball movement and then be able to join in on offense is going to be extremely hard, because if you can't move the footy and if you can't defend it, you're gone. And these guys are just like the Matty Cottrell quote from last year: people don't go to the footy to watch me. Yeah, I feel for you, Matty. They don't. Michael Voss would celebrate everything that you do every single week, and your teammates would. And without them, you just can't compete. And fortunately for GWS, they've clearly focused on that as a list management and recruiting team, and they've nailed it so far.
All recent premiers have had a good bevy of them, haven't they? They're used for good and for evil, Gerard. They're used on offence, they're used on defence. Speaking of defence, I tell you, the amount of times, I've had $1 for every time we heard about the Hawthorn defence over the pre-season. Battle and Barrass, and you throw Frost in there. Sicily, all 4 of them have played there at times. The Hawthorn defence, how does it sit with you at the moment?
I find it amusing that we're all so impatient and we want everything to be perfect as quickly as we possibly can. But the reality is, from round 0 until grand final day, it is a 30-week campaign. It is a long time, and you do not want to be perfect so early on in the season, and history shows that. And I think with Hawthorn, their defensive unit is probably what we're all going to be watching early on in the season, and how Barrass and Battle join into this defensive system. And with the 1-game sample size so far, there are definitely pieces where I would have thought Sam Mitchell and the coaching group are happy. So with their ability to be able to defend, probably along with Brisbane, the most potent and damaging turnover team on offense last year in Sydney, to keep them to 23 points is a huge effort. Their ability to be able to use the ball by foot behind centre. Battle's a good ball user. Barrass is, he's a bit of a safe ball user, but a good ball user. on top of what Scrimshaw and Sicily and Amon and Impey and D'Ambrosio when he's playing that wing centre-half back sort of role. Sort of, that Scrimshaw kick in the first quarter where he cut the ball back into the corridors, one of the great kicks that you'll probably see for the year.
Yeah.
And it's already happened
brilliant.
in 2025.
I think Gary Lyon nailed it and focused on it.
Yeah, so that part of it was there and on show so far.
And even time for a little bit of frost ball too, I might add. A little stubbing of the toe and a little grubber as well for good measure. Anyway, I digress.
How entertaining is it?
Continue, please, continue.
So that was the good. The part where they will clearly go to work on, and as I said, it's a 30-week campaign. You don't want to be finished right now. So their intercept game on the weekend, huge strength. That is going to be the challenge against Hawthorn. 22 intercept marks off the chart. But when the ball gets to ground, we've only seen the one game so far, Sydney did look a significant threat against Hawthorn in Hawthorn's D50. And to be fair to the Swans, they haven't got the absolute elite group of small forwards in there that some of the teams like a GWS and a Geelong in particular and a Brisbane that are actually going to challenge that defensive group. So how they get that balance right, Hawthorn, is going to be a work in progress. No one is expecting it to be a finished product this early on in the season. I wouldn't have thought it's going to be a finished product until probably July or August if you're a Hawthorn supporter, which is fine. But just a couple of little areas to work on off the back of already some significant positives after one game of footy.
They call them the goal codes, Gerard. They're the codes that the US president has to launch the nukes. Heaven forbid that time should come. Do you reckon the equivalent of that sits in Sam Mitchell's coach's box for James Sicily? Like just the big button that he send him forward. You feel like they'll never start him forward for whatever reason. Maybe it's psychologically more difficult to start forward and be the man, but you just know that button's always going to be at arm's reach, don't you, throughout the season?
It's actually a good point you raise, a psychological challenge, because plenty of blokes, they've tried that. 3 or 4 games they've gone from backline to forward line. All of a sudden they become forwards and struggle. Melbourne's had a couple of examples. Kangaroos have had a couple of examples. But he's an extraordinary unit, is James Sicily, Hoyne.
Yeah, no, he is, and it sort of almost takes you back to 15, 20 years ago of a few of those players that that did it quite regularly, playing that forward centre half, sort of centre half back, centre half forward, being able to flick it over.
I'll give you one from the 70s who was probably one of the firsts to go. And he had the barrel chest. He was from Tasmania. It was Brent Croswell. He used to always do the charge from the back line to the forward line, or vice versa.
Where would you place Sicily, G? Would you play him forward or back?
I think their best side is when he is going to be forward. I think their back line has got enough. Depends on whether Lewis is available and Kelshire is available. But without, you're probably going to start him down back. But I think ultimately he's going to do his best damage in the forward line, because I think what's going to happen, and it only took Coxie 2 quarters to work it out, and he may, in hindsight, think, well, why didn't I do that earlier? Sicily, like Daicos, should be tagged every week and play him from behind. I mean, he's got the knack of being able to get away with pushing the backs on a regular basis by just nudging people forward, to use the incorrect terminology. But you got to play him for what he is, and that is he's such an outstanding play from behind defender. You got to play him from behind and try and limit him like they did on the weekend with Hayward.
Champion Nutters Daniel Hoyne will be with us each and every Tuesday on Sports Day. Hoyne, what do you value?
Yeah, what do you value? So I reckon there was a game last year, Collingwood v Adelaide, and Nick Daicos had 40-odd touches, 41 touches. And that Tuesday we discussed, I didn't think it was one of his better games, and we had him as about, the 20th or 21st rated player on the ground despite the 41 touches. And that was because of the impact that he didn't have with how he used it. So I am not interested in Nick's second half. Just not worried about that when he couldn't walk and he couldn't run. We're just more looking at the first half, and we're looking at evidence from last year compared to what we saw in 2023. So the version of Nick in 2023 that, if he didn't get injured late in the year, he would have been a runaway Brownlow medalist. The aspect of his game that made him, if not the best player, one of the best players in the competition was how he used the footy. He had the third most impact of any player in the competition with his ball use in 2023. his impact with how he won it. So just think of, winning it at stoppage, winning contested possessions, how you're actually winning the footy all around the ground, outside of the top 50. But it was his ball use. And I keep going back to grand final day just before halftime. That kick back inboard that set up the Jack Crisp goal right on halftime was something that probably only Nick can actually do in the competition. Through injury to Tom Mitchell, through injury to Jordan De Goey over the last 18 months, he's been mainly had to be used as a ball-winning Nick Daicos. So his impact, because he's such a good footballer, his ability to then to be able to play that role, can't be questioned. He's had the 7th most impact of any player in the competition with how he's actually won the ball. But how he's used it has taken a hit. He's now outside the top 20 players in the competition, which is still a good rating. But he's outside the top 20 players in the competition with the impact that he's having from ball in hand. So how Collingwood actually get him back, I think, to being ball user Nick as opposed to ball winning Nick is going to determine a lot of what they do this year, because the version that you see of Nick when he uses the footy is something that basically only he can do as a midfielder in the competition. So hopefully De Goey's coming back this week. It might take him a little while to actually get back into centre bounce midfield minutes. Tom Mitchell, I'm not too sure how far away he is. But in the meantime, potentially you need to look at a Jack Crisp getting thrown into centre bounce minutes. He didn't attend a centre bounce at all in the first half against GWS on the weekend. Just trying to help this guy out so you can actually get him to actually be a second receive type player and then use his ball use ability. You compare him to what Finn Callaghan did on the weekend, and the Finn Callaghan profile is what we saw from Nick in 2023. Only 9 contested possessions for Callaghan and 25 uncontested possessions. It allowed him to be a ball-using midfielder. It allowed him to have the impact on a game through his ball use that we have hardly seen from any midfielder in any game over the last 8 years. So I think this is the challenge for Collingwood over the next period of time until Mitchell comes back and until De Goey is absolutely fully fit. How do they get some others through there to maximise their number one asset to challenge the competition?
The only problem with your theory, Hoyne, is that I think the competition is now starting to turn itself back towards tagging. And Nick will go, if they find the ball-winning capacities of De Goey, etc., to allow him to become the outside player, well, then he's going to be tagged, I've got no doubt, much more this season. Well, to counter the tag because of the outside use of the ball, he's going to have to then become ball-winning Nick again. So there's this push-me-pull-you sort of situation going on. Collingwood want him to get on the outside, but the clubs, they're happy for him to be on the outside because he's going to be easier to tag. So therein lies the challenge, I think, for Collingwood and for Nick as he goes on.
Yeah, and I remember that home and away game last year against Brisbane in that second quarter where he was actually, sort of thrown across the half-forward area to actually, try and break the tag. He started that second quarter was something that we haven't seen very rarely from many players. So, yeah, I think that's a challenge for Collingwood moving forward.
But your guess who didn't, well, at least I don't think it focused on them. Have you got a guess? I've got a guess ready for him, G, have you?
Can you give us the question again, Hoyne?
Yeah, last 6 years this guy has played for. He's played as a key position player and he played on the weekend. He's never been a top 150 rated player in the competition. And who is that player? And he's of conversation at the moment.
I reckon you might have given a little bit too much away with that last hint. Or maybe not. I'm going McCartan.
Yeah. There's one person on the text who's got this.
The trouble with Hoyne is if he sets it up to be an absolute obvious like McCartan,
it's not.
You can guarantee it's not McCartan.
I'm going with him regardless. I'm going Big Tom.
Tom, are you going with Tom G?
No, I'm not going with Tom. No, because I know how you are.
You're reading his body language.
I'm going with. I haven't got a third. I haven't got a second.
Well, unfortunately, G, you're actually incorrect. We needed to get Sammy on the board very early this year to get in a bit of confidence. So it actually is Tommy McCartan. Well done, Sammy. Well done. 1 from 1 to start the year.
Beginner's luck.
So the reason
that's unlike you, Hoyne. You never give obvious ones.
No, but I had to just give him a bit of confidence for the year. Had to just get him going first.
Clearly misguided
give him an easy kill. So. Yeah, so the reason why I just wanted to put this, as a talking point for us to discuss tonight is that, clearly the move of him forward is topical at the moment, and he's creating conversation, and rightly so. And it's which way you can take it. It's just depending on which way that you actually lean. But I think everyone's now sort of from what I've heard is like Tommy McCartan's one of the best key defenders in the competition. You got to get him back. Well, yeah. He's been a good player, but he's not Sam Taylor. He's not Jeremy McGovern. He's not Jacob Wiedering. He's not Harris Andrews. He's not a game. He hasn't been a game-changing fullback, centre half back, and he hasn't been that sort of key defender where you look up as an opposition team and you're threatened by his presence.
Is there a ripple effect to these things though?
But I would be looking at it, and I think the discussion is more around, okay, if you take him out and don't replace him with another key defender, then that's a fair conversation for me. So I'm looking at someone like a Joel Hamling, right, who's been brought in from the Swans, from Freo as a delisted free agent, I think he was, played in that Indigenous game a couple of weeks ago, played in the practice match not long ago. I think that's the conversation for me. I don't mind Sydney actually experimenting with McCartan inside forward 50 to actually create that contest ahead of the ball, which Dean Cox is actually looking for. Their contest behind the ball last year, Sydney, was actually bottom 4 in the competition. Their defensive profile last year Sydney got worse as the year went on. Their defensive profile last year Sydney, in terms of how they defended the opposition off turnover, was bottom 6 in the competition. So it wasn't as if it was an absolute bulletproof, rock-solid defensive system. And I've heard Dean Cox mention this, that he wants to change the way in which they defend. And you can understand why with the defensive profile that they had in place last year. And McCartan was there for pretty much the majority of the season. So I think people need to sort of just relax on this guy potentially being, one of the best key defenders in the competition. He's a reasonable key defender, but I think it's worth experimenting him going forward if you potentially are looking to replace him with a Joel Hamling. And you go back, with what Hamling's done over his career, it's not too dissimilar to the numbers that Tom McCartan has sort of put up over the last 4, 5, 6 seasons. So, that's why I wanted to put the McCartan discussion up and just see.
Good discussion, really good discussion, and I think you've given us an insight into why Coxie's done exactly what he's done. He knows the numbers far better than most Swan supporters and most people out in the media, so he knows what he's doing. The issue is, can Hamling come in, as you said, and fulfil it? But it does appear as if Aaron Francis is in front of Hamling.
Yeah, potentially, and the other one with Blakey as well. So, Blakey was really quiet in that first quarter. Didn't have much of an impact. But the way that he finished the game, we had him as the second highest rated player on the ground behind Will Day. So his ability to be able to impact mainly through how he actually used the ball was there. So I think we just need to sort of, relax just a little bit with, the overall discussion around it. I reckon, as I said, moving him out, McCartan, that is, from back to forward and not replacing him with any sort of, key defender. I think that's an interesting discussion, but I can understand why he's actually looked to deploy him elsewhere.
All right, we're closer to round 1 than we are the end of opening round. So I know you want to cast your eye forward here, Hoyne, because we renew hostilities on Thursday. We've got Richmond and the Blues, and then a big one on the Friday as well, in particular Hawthorn, and we get our first look at Essendon. So let's look ahead. You've got the Blues on your running sheet.
Yeah, so like we said with GWS earlier on, the early rounds of this season, we are looking to see whether or not teams have gone to work on some areas of concern from the previous season. And the only thing I think we will be looking at with Carlton in the first 4, 5, 6 weeks of the year is their defensive system, and in particular, how they defend stoppages. So my stoppage theory, and as I said to you guys for the last couple of years, you're relying on individual talent more than you are system, as opposed to when you are, sort of defending turnover. So if you lose that stoppage situation, you're basically defending for your life for a 10 to 15 second, where we're relying on you as an individual to hold up until the defensive system can come in. How Carlton defended that aspect of the game last year was bottom 5. They went from second at round 17, 18 to barely scraping through to actually play finals. Their full ground defensive system last year, once everyone could actually come in and support the individuals behind the footy, was actually fine. But just being able to hold up one-on-one as an individual outside of Wiedering was a significant concern for Carlton last year. Clearly, they've gone to work on the individual side of things. It looks like Silvani's going to play behind the footy. They've brought in Nick Haynes from GWS. It'd be interesting to see whether or not he can actually get back to the footy that he played, 3, 4, 5 years ago for GWS. Questions are over that. Lockie Cowan looks like he's going to be given a bit more responsibility if the practice matches are anything to go off. Clearly, Nick Newman's going to be a big loss behind the footy. His organisation behind the ball, is going to be a huge loss behind there. So how they rejig this back, 6, 7, 8 players is going to be interesting and something to keep an eye on. It's going to be something to keep an eye on against Richmond. But then in particular, I think their draw gets a little bit more challenging after the Richmond game on Thursday night.
Looks like the other Hollands is going to be on the halfback flank, but his kicking is going to be challenged, I reckon, in that role.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, he does have the speed and endurance to be able to provide offensive threat to the to Carlton's ball movement game, which was a little bit of a concern at times last year. We talked about how important that is. If you can't, if you don't have that aspect in your wheelhouse, it's going to be hard to compete. So that'll be interesting to see how he goes behind the footy.
All right, let's have a look at Port Adelaide. They're on your little microscope as well. They've got Collingwood Saturday night at the MCG. So
I think Port have been probably one of the more predictable teams in the competition for the last 4, 5, 6 years with how they wanted to play under Ken, and it's been attractive to watch, but it's come with some concerns going back the other way. They have been a high corridor team. No one used the corridor more than Port Adelaide last year, and they used it more by a long, long, long way. Their clearance game is the 4th best in the competition. Their pressure game last year was the 2nd best in the competition, but outside of clearance and pressure, once the ball actually left the stoppage situation, that was the concern for them. Bottom 3 in their ability to be able to win contest outside of stoppage. So if I'm looking at it, I'm just wondering whether or not Port have actually gone to work over the off-season to look at their clearance game being such a strength. Do we actually want to play more of a high stoppage and a high boundary game to actually force these stoppages, get it into a stoppage game, let Horne-Francis, let Butters, let Wines go to work, given that is our strength? Or do we actually just double down on this aggressive, high corridor, go quick, go through the corridor and actually play a risky game which doesn't actually allow you to maximise your assets around stoppage? So that to me is going to be interesting. If you're sitting there on Saturday night and you're seeing Port go through corridor, pull the ball back through corridor, you can safely assume that nothing's changed and they're going to double down on this approach. If you see them go a little bit wider and actually want to create stoppages, that will be sort of more interest to see whether or not they're actually trying to maximise their assets that they have on their list.
They do look like they're going a bit more multi-pronged in the forward line, Hoyne, just from what we saw of the practice match.
Yeah, they're going to be interesting to see what they sort of go with inside their forward 50s. Obviously Finlayson's played the practice match series behind the footy.
Yeah.
Marshall's now out, for the year. We talked about those smalls at the top of the show. Can Port actually find a few of these smalls ahead of the ball to be able to participate and get involved in the ball movement game more than what they have previously? That's probably going to be a challenge. It's easier said than done. Joe Richards is going to be an interesting recruit, for them this year. They've clearly picked him up to, sort of add to that, sort of group of small forwards. So I'll just be really interested to see whether or not they absolutely sort of change the way they play, or if they back in what they have for the last 5-6 years.
Now, North Melbourne. I don't know how often they've been on your run sheet, Hoyne, but they've got the Western Bulldogs, 7:35.
Big game.
Marvel Stadium. I can't believe it. Anyway, I don't know if we talk about odds here, but they are long odds and juicy ones. I reckon they're a real chance here.
Big game, isn't it? Clearly an ideal time to get the Dogs with their injury list at the moment. But if you're a North supporter, we didn't talk about North too much last year for obvious reasons. But unfortunately, the reality was last year that they went backwards. Their percentage went from, they're about 70% in 2023 to under 65% last year. What they did with the footy and without the footy was 18th in the competition. So we saw the method that they tried to introduce early on in the year, which was speed, aggressiveness, pull the kicks off through the corridor, wanting to get some offensive returns. But what had happened defensively was a significant issue, and they were conceding scores of around the 120, 130 point mark quite often in the first 11 weeks of the year. They then significantly changed their method. They went into a really slow ball movement game to be able to, I think, try and give this defensive group a bit of a chance to defend behind the footy. I think the addition of Caleb Daniel is going to be a really important one. So take out the 2024 season. His previous 5 years before that, he was inside the top 100 rated players in the competition each and every season. So his ball use is going to be critical to then allow North Melbourne to be able to get out of their back half and then maximise their absolute true assets, which sit in the midfield group and the forward half of the group. We're talking about LDU, whether or not he can do what a Will Day and what a Jai Newcomb did on Friday night by spending more time inside forward 50. Sheasel turned into a centre forward player last year and became one of the best players in the competition. What does McKercher do this year? Started across halfback. Sheasel started across halfback. Does he go into the midfield and release that dynamic left foot kick of his, which is clearly his number one asset, that he has for North Melbourne. So just a couple of little things there to look for, if you're North Melbourne, more on the individual side, which will hopefully improve this overall team performance profile.
Plenty to ponder. So many questions, and we're about to get a whole bunch of answers. That's why this weekend is so highly anticipated. You got a bit left in you here, Hoyne. Who did we miss as a regular of yours?
Yeah, so Friday night, Lloyd Meek didn't get a vote from the coaches.
No coaches vote.
Didn't get a vote. We had him as the third highest rated player on the ground. 2 goals from Lloyd, getting forward and hurting Brodie Grundy that way.
The Meetax.
Very impressive. And then a Champion Data favourite, now I think an industry-wide favourite, Brent Daniels, didn't get a vote from the coaches. We had him as the third highest rated player on the ground. He might have the best feet in the industry.
He's lightning.
Brent Daniels. His ability to be able to get out of traffic is just... He's unbelievable, absolutely torched Collingwood.
He's like you, Hoyne. He's a regular on Sports Day.
Is he? Brent Daniels, no wonder I love him.
He's joining us.
Yeah, no wonder I love him. So, they were the two that we missed on the weekend from the 2 games.
What about your MDP, most damaging player?
Most damaging player. So, impossible to go past Finn Callaghan. That will be one of the highest rated games that we've seen across the season, let alone the round. His ball use, as I said, was the second best by a midfielder in any game over the last 8 years. So, hard to go past there. Thought Darcy Cameron, with how he actually won the ball on the weekend against GWS, I think he capitalised on Kieran Briggs going down. So he was one of the few pies that actually had a really good day. And then Lewis Malikan with his defensive actions on the weekend.
Underrated, Lewis.
The Pelican.
Impacted the game more with their defensive actions than Lewis Malikan.
Now each week you're going to give us a gem and a horror. You want to start with the good or the bad?
No, we always start with the good.
And
then we'll quickly finish with
the horror. Hit Gerard with the horror.
We'll quickly finish with the horror. So
quickly.
Just want to give Will Day a bit of love. Clearly his game on the weekend has been spoken about at length. But at half-time, he had 19 disposals and 3 goals. In the Champion Data world, where footy didn't begin before 1999, so since 99, no Hawthorn player has ever done that in a half of footy. 19 disposals and 3 goals in a half. So
amazing.
Did footy actually exist before 1999, Hoyne?
Life didn't exist before 99, Joe. So I don't even know what life was like.
Who gave us the horror show? Who gave you the
horror? The Swans, unfortunately. So this isn't an event. This is now a trend for the Swans. Swans. They have lost contested footy in 10 of their last 11 games.
Ooh.
It's the worst streak the Swans have had in over 20 years.
Where's the muscle? What happened to the Bloods culture, G?
I'm not sure, but it's been one of the great myths of the last, well, more than a year, really. The contest is, since Josh Kennedy left, the contest has left.